Yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining us. I know in some places it's early, some places it's later in the day, like for most of our panelists here today, but they've been so kind to join us, and thank you to the audience as well. Most of you joining us here today are in the shipbuilding industry. That makes total sense. So you know better than anyone that shipbuilding is completely unique. It's different from most other or almost every other manufacturing industry that builds big things. Shipbuilders need to fabricate millions of parts, build tens of thousands of assemblies, manage thousands of changes, on and on and on, all while working with legacy data, where you're having to reuse the information that's available, ensuring digital information is available for the future. And the reality is that these challenges mean that there's never going to be one system or platform that can do it all, at least at the level that shipyards expect of their work. And so the world that is emerging and that we're living in is that these platforms that we are using need to be able to talk to other platforms. We've referred to this as platforms thinking. That's become kind of an industry term for it. So it's not only important for the individual platform to have the right technology, but they need to be able to connect together and integrate together to give you that full view of your project. And what makes that happen is the partnerships behind these connections. That's the key piece of the puzzle for shipyards, and it's why we've come here. It's why I've come here together today with these industry experts to talk about the role of partnerships and how that plays a part can play a part in your shipyard and digital transformation. So to get started, I'll just introduce everyone, give you an overview of what they do and who they are. So to start with Denis, Denis is the co-CEO of SSI and an expert in digital shipbuilding technology. He's been with SSI since 2002, almost 20 years now. And in that time, he's worked to establish SSI as a leader in transforming how shipbuilders approach some of their toughest challenges. Partnerships is one of his favorite topics, so it's great to have him with us today. Runar Aasen is the manager of BNA Software, the parent company behind ShipWeight and Express Marine. These two solutions are a really good example of why the unique nature of shipbuilding requires specific solutions. So the weight management and initial design capabilities of this package aren't necessarily available in less specific tools, and the information they produce has to be used throughout the entire project. We have also here Jean-Marc Roux. Jean-Marc's a software engineer, CEO, and founder of Aerys, the company that developed SmartShape. As acting project manager, he also supervised the implementation of SmartShape at Chantier de l'Atlantique for multiple use cases in terms of piping, hull, electrical, and engineering, and they've worked with Bureau Veritas for some of their projects. We have here with us today also Ian. Ian's a director at Cloudis. He's been with that company. He joined the company that later became Cloudis in 1996. In 2002, in partnership with a colleague, he bought the business. Cloudis really focuses attention on cable management software for shipbuilding in particular, and is another great example of a solution provider that focuses in on something specific that shipbuilders specifically need. Matthias Grau is the key account manager for the marine, offshore, and plant industries at PROSTEP. PROSTEP are a key player in information integration within the shipbuilding industry, and their embrace of the platforms approach I've talked about has resulted in a successful partnership with SSI since 2017, I believe. And we work together on numerous client initiatives, and our two teams have been able to connect previously disparate platforms and bring the information together. And lastly, Ronald. Ronald de Vries is the managing director and co-owner of Floorganise. Floorganise is a leader in smart shipyard operations and planning, and their work focuses on bridging the gap between complex engineering, design, and shipyard operations, and providing information transparency as a result of that. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. It's going to be a great event. Rare do you have so many great shipbuilding, digital shipbuilding minds in one place. So yeah, it's great to have you here. To the audience, I'd like to remind you again, please feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A panel. Today, we're mostly focusing on audience questions because they've been pre-submitted, but we'll have time for live questions right at the end of the event. And yeah, we'll leave plenty of time to answer your questions. If you'd like to address a question to someone specifically, please feel free to include that in your question in the chat. So to start off with, Denis, you've just to kind of give everyone an introduction, you've talked for many years about the benefits of platforms ecosystem, but a lot of the benefits are focused on kind of technology and maybe more specific technical gains. What have been some of the largest business impacts for shipyards who've embraced the strategy?
That's a great question here. I'm going to probably have to start to set up my answer a little bit here. And, it's starting, I don't want to say right at the beginning, but, we have to remember that shipbuilding was one of the first industries to implement digital technologies. And this is again, decades ago. And with this technology, we got a lot of the benefit from this technology, which mostly was focused a little bit more on creating of data. So we're able to create data faster, more reliably, and accurately. But as our experience kind of grew with this technology, we started applying this technology in various different parts of our business. So in essence, every major part of our business had some sort of technology. It might not be considered as sophisticated as we are at what we have today, but it's still at that time, I would say, cutting edge. But as our appetite grew, and solving some of the biggest challenges that we had with this technology, we had I would say, a new type of problem. And this problem really stemmed from that we use technology to solve very discrete or local problems. And the problem that we had, that it was very difficult on moving information from that was created in one area of the business to another area of the business. And this should sound familiar with what we have today, because we're still trying to solve this in many of the organizations and many of the companies and businesses that we have today. So trying to connect this local solution together, we quickly found that we had the house of cards, that we were able to connect some systems and to solve some basic use cases, I would say. But as we started connecting more subsystems, we quickly realized that integrating between these subsystems was using technology that was not designed to easily connect to other subsystems. So therefore, it would not really scale to, I would say, the business of shipbuilding. So us still seeing the benefit of connecting this value across our whole business, but knowing that we wouldn't be able to connect all these different subsystems, which could be hundreds or even thousands, really led us to this idea of this monolithic solution, or the idea of the monolithic solution, which is the one source of truth. And in essence, the pendulum swung. But unfortunately, this, in theory would work, but in practice, it really doesn't. It's like what I would say, chasing a unicorn. It would be awesome if you would catch it, but if, it's highly unlikely. And at this point, shipbuilding kind of stalled, that we really stopped being innovative. And it's probably one of the reasons why we're probably considered as conservative as we are. And the reason I mention all this, because I think it's important for us to understand that shipbuilding had and continues to have an appreciation for the importance of having information connected across the entire business. Doesn't matter if you're in shipbuilder, shipyard, design agency, supplier, as long as you're in the industry, we've always had this appreciation. So the way that I look at it is that building a ship, maintaining a ship requires more of a system approach or system thinking. And with this realization, it's really that you have many highly connected and dependent subsystems that need to work independently, but are still connected to, or still part of something larger, part of a bigger puzzle, or a piece of a puzzle that's part of a puzzle, if you will. So if we use the same philosophy, with our enterprise architecture, really leads us down to this, what I would say, this platform approach, which you have many of these larger applications that can work independently, but also connect as a first-class citizen to other platforms. And so in essence, we're building this, enterprise technology system that is using this, I would say, platform approach. Now, to more specifically answer your question, the initial benefits that we see with using a lot of this platform approach is that we're finally now allowed to solve this decade-old problem of connecting data across our enterprise, which I would say was really plaguing our industry. And when I say connecting information, we can talk about this digital twin, digital ship, even digital thread, to use more of the marketing buzzwords. But the success is largely due to the software today, the way that it's built really aligns with this platform approach, where software vendors really realizing that each platform or tool or application is really part of something bigger. And therefore, it requires it to freely and easily distribute and consume information with other platforms, no matter where it's located, as well as whichever software vendor actually created it. So I think a lot of the successes that we see with our clients and our partners, which are on the panel today, is really connecting this information across the client's enterprise ecosystem. So that's definitely one of the major benefits. But, if I look at some of the values and away from the technologies, you're kind of mentioning it, I think there is another important benefit that I think is a little softer and squishy, if you will, that is not discussed very much. And it really relates to improving the ability for a company to focus. And there's just so many great things that we can do today that can have a positive impact to our business, and using all this mature and available technology. But this abundant amount of possibilities also creates a problem that many of us have today, where we just simply have too many options. And it's a common saying that I have to my team that they're probably tired of me saying, is that we're at a point in time that we need to decide which great ideas not to do, which makes it really hard when we're trying to prioritize all these top initiatives, because the things that we're not going to do are still great ideas. But as the saying goes, if you don't prioritize what is important, nothing gets done. So how that relates to the benefits that we're seeing is that there's no way for a company to be able to implement or update all their platforms. So in essence, they're kind of being forced to determine what are the biggest business challenges that they have today to solve, and pick the platform or platforms that they want to update, which again is a small subset of their entire business ecosystem, to ultimately achieve their business goal. So the requirement to focus is extremely important, and definitely I would say, a key trait that I see in many organizations and companies that are successful in their digital transformation. And I think is actually one of the outcomes of this platform strategy. And one of the main areas I see in people focusing on is really about getting their data under control, which is obvious. If you look at any digital initiative that any organization has today, it all requires, your digital information to be accessible, available, accurate, organized. And this is every digital initiative. And that's why we're seeing a lot of platforms, ERP and PLM are probably the two ones that are being focused on it, which is driving other applications. Again, a lot of our partner applications, and even in some cases our applications from their initiatives. So, but another benefit I'll say, sorry, to take this very, very quick, is really the combination of the two, where we are actually now having information flowing through our enterprise architecture, as well as us being more focused, is that it is really leading us to have more agile implementation. So a lot of the agile implementations that we have today are actually becoming more agile. And I could talk for hours on this, but in short, it's really implementing these large initiatives in small bite-sized chunks that each have business value, which I think is key. So it makes it a little bit more manageable.
I'd like to dive into one of the points you made, the idea of having too much choice. And Matthias, PROSTEP is kind of at the heart of so many of these integration initiatives. How have you seen shipbuilders approach this idea of having too much choice of which vendor do we integrate with, which solution do we go with, which platform is right for us? How have they changed their approach to that? Yes.
Yep. Okay, so for that, in our experience, when we look back in the projects that we did with clients and as consultants, for instance, then we cannot see that there is one size fits all approach. But companies are first of all, and shipbuilding are first of all tend to be a bit conservative. So they stick to what they have and they stick to what they are, and they are kind of reluctant to change. But of course, more and more shipyards understand that they have to do some change and that they have to get rid of their Excel-based data organization, and that they might have to do some modernization in getting rid of drawing-based development and then gradually moving more and more to model-based development. Well, I think most of shipyards understand that they have to move somehow. Then, of course, the big question is what to do. Most important thing is for them that most important problem that we always see is that they basically come to, for instance, us, as we are working as consultants, also on a strategy level with shipyards, and that they're asking us, we would like to change another ERP system. We would like to change to another CAD system. We'd like to implement a PDM system. We did not have one before, but we see we have to do something. But Our problem is that we don't know how to connect those afterwards. So we are basically having things under control for now with our file I/O type of process automation, but this is not sufficient anymore, and we need to do something with it, and we don't know how to do this. And this tends to influence our decision and the way we are looking for a new solution, new piece of software, whichever it might be. Then, of course, question is what would be the best approach to help them out, and obviously our response in those situations will be, don't worry, there's a technical way, there's a technical solution to connect the systems, or at least most of the major systems that are in the market. Let's focus on what exactly are your needs, what's the best fit of your requirements with the offering of the different vendors that are in the market. And let's basically look at these and find out what would be maybe a good shortlist for you to make a decision upon. And then let's start a discussion which of those candidates on your shortlist of software vendors to be selected can be integrated in your existing IT environment and process environment in the best possible way, and how would that work? So that's basically a duality of discussion that needs to happen. And that's what we do and what we see once in a while, or more often than not, with our customers. Does that make sense?
I find that totally interesting. I kind of loved what I heard there in the case that it's pretty much, don't worry about the technology and the connection. We'll worry about that. We can connect it. That's not the problem. The problem really is trying to determine what you want to solve and what goals you're trying to achieve, which I think is always one of the things that people lost at the beginning, which when they got the new technology, it's like, okay, well, now how do we implement this technology? Well, that's kind of going backwards. First, figure out what you need to solve. We can connect and make the software work the way you want to, but what business problem do you want to solve? I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, of course, you are right. That's the other dimension, or one other dimension of this discussion, and that's typically summarized as the tool is not a solution. So basically, you need to have this, or need to see this in the context of your overall development process or manufacturing process, and of course, it needs to fit somewhere in there. And this is basically where you should start thinking from, not first looking at the tool. That's basically why I think it's important to understand the requirements that companies have in terms of CAD systems, PDM systems, whatever, and have discussed those requirements with them, and then of course also discuss how it's going to technically work, how implementation of software is going to technically work, and of course how integration of different software tools is going to technically work. But again, this is only for the sake to serve the needs of the business in the company. In agreement, Dennis.
One of the things you just mentioned there is to serve the needs of the company and the shipyard specifically. One of the things I mentioned in the intro was the idea of shipbuilding being so specific. And in your company, Cloudis, they approach the very specific niche of cable routing and cable management. How does your company, how does Cloudis fit into this platform approach when you're working with such a kind of a small niche?
Well, I think early on we realized that we were going to have to integrate with other technologies. We, going from a position where actually going back 20 years, the cableways themselves would actually be created using 2D drawings. Now, we were in a position having a database solution where we could convert those 2D drawings into a database and use that database then to route cables. Where we are now is that probably, the best of the best have probably got 90% of a joined up end-to-end process as far as cabling is concerned. It's not only a design issue, of course, it's also a production issue. That there's still in a lot of companies the idea that, okay, we've created the cable routes, we've printed off a sheet that shows the guys how to install these cables. Let's throw it over now to the production guys. And obviously the cost of change, we talk about business benefits, the cost of change can be enormous if you have to start ripping out cables, or you have to start putting in new cables because the cable that you put in is not in the right place. It's the wrong kind of cable, doesn't have the right kind of ampage, whatever. It's of the wrong length and so on. So the cost of change is something that, I think we all drive to reduce through our technologies. And as I say, we realized early on that we couldn't exist as an island, if you like, and that we have to integrate with, in particular, CAD systems, in particular, PDM systems, but also increasingly, looking at ERP, looking at costing, looking at financial systems, and all the aspects that are impacted by cabling and that themselves impact cabling. Luckily, I think, people are nowadays, particularly with the globalization of shipbuilding, which frankly 25 years didn't exist, particularly in the naval sector. We were in really a cost plus business where, basically each country had its own shipbuilding business for the naval sector. It would say, tell me how much it's going to cost to build this and add 5% and that's your profit. We've gone beyond that now where, countries are buying designs from other countries. They're building it to design and so on. And that's brought new pressures, but also new opportunities for technology companies, which I think we've all seen. And I think one of the business benefits, certainly for the end user, is that, the big customers in shipbuilding can now look around and say, well, who not only has the technology, but who also has the shipbuilding skills and can build this ship at a price that I find is acceptable. So I think all those factors kind of weigh into what we all do. I'm not sure that's an answer about cabling specifically, but just talking about technology and shipbuilding generally.
I just wanted to confirm it's probably true for more things than just cabling.
Yeah, I liked one of the things you said, Ian, about throwing or having information thrown over. And I was thinking of Runar, your solutions, Express Marine and ShipWeight are all kind of focused on the beginning of the shipbuilding process. And that information that's generated there could be thrown over to downstream disciplines and the rest of the process. Does knowing that change the way you approach integration or your solutions, knowing that information may just be thrown over and not considered later?
Well, I think it depends a little bit. It's a little bit different with Express Marine and ShipWeight in that sense. Express Marine is more limited in the time. It's more connected to the basic. But thrown over, I mean, that's the first thing that happens when we show it to someone is that they say, well, okay, so we're going to make me build another model. Well, you better tell me that I can reuse what I've done here further down. That's the first thing we mean. And also we've already done something before we start the Express Marine model. So we want to utilize that. So with Express Marine, you have to connect the tool to what's been done before and then connect it to what comes after. And that is maybe from our two tools that is sort of an easy thing to do because we have good ways of doing it. For example, through the Genesis API, we can, in a very smart and efficient, excellent way, just take what's been modeled in Express Marine and transfer it seamlessly over to ShipConstructor. ShipWeight is a little bit different because ShipWeight follows the project from very early, the tender phase, really, very early on and all the way through delivery. And with ShipWeight, I think it is more. I think it was said earlier here that okay, we have the technology all the way because ShipWeight wants to harvest wherever the most up-to-date weight and center of gravity information is at any point during the project. So in the early phase, you have something in basic design tools. Maybe you have historical data, you have some guesstimates, estimates. Later on, you have information from your maybe Express Marine, then from CAD systems, from vendors, from weights in the yards and so forth. And each step of the way, like you mentioned, technology-wise, there's always a way to link to it. But how to do it in a smart way? Where is the information? And when do you want to get it? And when is this the best information to harvest? And when is coming from ERP is the best? When is the vendor? When is the CAD model? That's, I think, was already mentioned here, a big challenge to streamline the philosophy, the structure behind how the information should flow into a tool like ShipWeight and how it should be distributed out of ShipWeight. Again, technology-wise, can fix it, but when, where, how to set up, that can be a big challenge, really.
I think, Ronald, one of the things that interests me about Floorganise is that it sits in the shipyard operation space. So you're interacting with a lot of different disciplines and you're in the middle of a lot of different disciplines. How does that change your approach to how you approach your product and maybe your view on integration?
Yeah, integration has always been at the forefront of what we do and what we develop. Especially because if you take a look at what happens on the shop floor, then obviously there's these fabrication steps with panel lines and maybe robotization. But ultimately, it's the people holding a welding torch and the screwdriver that build the ship together. So each individual person within that sequence has its own logic and preferences and information need. And what we see is that actually today I'm attending a fair with the Dutch Shipbuilding Association that looks beyond the upcoming years to see what's our, let's say, major challenges. And then we talk about shipping, green shipping, let's say, and making the industry more attractive for young people to attend. And because part of what we recognize is that the human capital aspect is still very, very crucial. So from attending that fair today, I also saw a sheet that made a comparison between the amount of hours spent building a car, which is 23 hours, a complex fighter jet, which is 60,000 hours, and then a complex ship of 1 million hours, and an air freight carrier with 10 million hours. So 150 more hours than a complex ship in comparison to a freight carrier. And then if you take a look at the number of parts, that's even the same explosion basically of parts. So what we see in shipbuilding is that the human factor, also translated by these hours, is still very important. And each individual person has a distinctive trait. And in order to use all that data throughout the shipyard to make it available for, let's say, the distinctive iron worker or carpenter or whatever role, that's a very, let's say, complex task. And obviously, that requires the involvement of a variety of databases to be accessed. So our emphasis and point of gravity is to bring that operational excellence. And in order to do that, you need to provide these users with, are my materials ready? How many hours do I have for this job? How does the IKEA booklet look like for these set of activities and all that? So you are very dependent on all the other systems at the yard. And the volume of these hours and the volume of these parts, the explosion of parts, and then also with the engineering to order, with changes late in the game, that really amplifies the need for having something that translates or that briefs shipbuilding basically, because we make a comparison oftentimes for the fabrication part with automobile factories or aerospace, but it's just a different game ultimately. So hopefully that's answer to your question.
Yeah, that's great. We actually had a good audience question just now, and it's talking about legacy systems and integrating legacy data. And I know, Jean-Marc, your solution and your organizations deal with a lot of legacy data. How do you deal with legacy data if the vendor or the tool or the person who knew how to use the tool isn't around? How do you work around that challenge?
That's a very good question, and it happens more often than it should. What we usually do is, first of all, we try to assess the value of the information, right? And to be able to do that, we really focus on the possible return on investment. It came very naturally because, I'm a software engineer. I'm not a sales guy. And 6 years ago, I was meeting Chantilly-Atlantique for the first time. I had no idea what shipbuilding was about. So I had to find value for my software, and I had to find how matching what we can do and what they need, what they have in store already, could produce something new that could be leveraged for new business, leverage to increase margin, and so on and so on. So we had to really work on these ROI sort of things. And the first question that we had to answer when we talk about legacy data, and it's who knows where the data is, what it's used for, what tools are actually using the data in or out. And we discovered that there are, as was mentioned, lots of silos in shipbuilding, a lot of silos and a great need for collaboration. And so as we needed to replace existing tools or to connect to existing tools, legacy tools, we really put an emphasis on the collaboration aspect. The fact that from now on, collaboration should be really centric on every new development. Everything should be collaboration first, so that everyone in the company can access the knowledge they need in real time. Okay, so remove those silos and put an emphasis in collaboration. Then it's also about, when you have legacy data, it's also about making sure that this platform we just talked about exists at some point. For example, being able to merge data coming from CMPeak and data coming from ShipConstructor will give you a new perspective. Okay, so it's not just data itself; it's how data is connected, and creating new relationship between different databases, between old tools and new tools, will really put a new way of seeing existing data, existing processes. So we focus a lot on not data itself, but on how it's connected. So for example, some people from engineering, they don't really care about specific attributes or specific objects, like say the connection between plates. It doesn't have intrinsic value to them, right? But to welders, it does. And if you're not able, as a company, to have those two people in the same room collaborating on the same tool, you can't really put a value on that data. And if you don't have the relationship between those two information, you're missing on something. So being able to connect information is maybe more important than having the information available. Okay, it's not enough. Then there is a question of the data being unusable because it's using legacy formats, for example, because of so many reasons. The first one is the format itself. There is a lot of information in paper, for example. Lots of companies thought that because we're moving and using digital tools like PDF, for example, they would really alleviate this problem of legacy and knowledge management. They would have like every documentation somewhere safe in PDF. That would be much easier. But the fact is, using a digital file is maybe just as bad as using paper. In the end, a file is just a copy of some information in someone's computer. So you replace a sheet of paper on someone's desk with a file in someone else's computer. But in the end, it's a copy of copy, and you still lose a lot. So companies have to move past this idea that because it's on my screen and not on paper, well, I'm safe and I can leverage it the way I need to. It's also often unusable because there is a vast quantity of data. So we're looking at terabytes of data at Chantilly-Atlantique. I think we're approaching 6 terabytes of data inside Smartship that they're updated on a daily basis. So you need, the computing power, you need the storage, and you need, of course, tools to leverage that data. So that's something SmartShape is really good at, something we really invest in very early on, being able to compute, leverage, and render on screen very large quantities of data. So the goal is that there is no touching that too much data. And finally, one of the last problems with legacy is something that can be very specific, things that can be proprietary. What we've seen is that not just in shipbuilding, but in many industries that use CAD, software vendors are moving from a proprietary model that is leveraging proprietary file formats into a business model that leverages proprietary cloud. So those file formats now, they're easier and easier to use. You have lots of libraries and software that can leverage proprietary files formats. So now they're moving into proprietary clouds. So you basically have to give your data to those clouds to be able to leverage your data. So this idea of platform and integrating everything together, this idea of ecosystem that can still be on-premise, that do not, cause any issue regarding data governance, regarding security, and so on and so on. I think it's also a tremendous point. And for all the shipbuilding companies we work with, having the data on site, but still connected to their ecosystem is very important, right? So in tech, there's a lot of talk about cloud, everything connected, and so on and so on. But the reality is that on-premise is still the one thing used in this kind of use cases. We work for the D&D, for example, in Canada, so Department of Defense. We also work with the Canadian Coast Guards. And of course, if you tell them, put your data in a cloud, they'll just tell you no. Okay, it's a deal breaker. So being able to have this open ecosystem is very important. Open APIs, being service oriented, as Denis mentioned, and this ecosystem being able to talk to each other, it's very, very important to make sure that this legacy problem is mitigated. Worst case scenario, or not even a problem anymore. Best case scenario.
One of the things you said there, the idea of the proprietary nature, is directly related to a question we had from David. He asked, so who owns the digital twin? And if I can elaborate, when we're talking about this platforms approach, there's so many players involved, there's so many vendors involved. In this reality, who does own the digital twin or digital thread? Jean-Marc, I'm not sure if you have an answer, but anyone feel free to jump in.
Our logic is that we don't really like the coin term digital twin, because if you actually take twins and you put them in separate rooms and you ask them the same question, it's very likely they will answer two different things. And that's something you don't want, okay? So we like the idea of a digital avatar better, which conveys the idea that what you see on screen is just another way to see the same set of data, okay? So we should not separate the digital asset and the real life assets. They're one and the same. And so if you want to get the value of the asset, you need to have the digital asset and the real asset under control, okay? So it goes back to, if you give data to the cloud, you're giving a part of the asset, of the overall asset, to someone else. And that's an issue. So who owns the digital twin? That's a very, very complex question. I'm not going to dive into IP and stuff like that right now. But for sure, we put a real emphasis on the end user. The end user has to own it, not from an IT or IP perspective, but from a usability perspective. Okay, they have to feel like it's actually fulfilling what they need to do. It's not just an IT thing. It's a tool for real life applications on the shipyard. So end users have to own it and to feel, like it's something they own, for sure.
Another audience question we had a bit earlier.
I'll put my 2 cents on that one, Craig, if you don't mind. I think I like what you mentioned there, Jean-Marc, about the avatar, which is an interesting concept. But my answer very quickly from who owns the digital twin, from what people are saying, the digital twin, I don't think anybody owns it, because the whole thing is that there's going to be portions of that digital twin which will be owned by different organizations on what you need. Because when you're passing certain pieces of, and this whole idea that there's multiple digital twins, like a simulation digital twin, a maintenance digital twin, and so forth. So I don't think there's going to be one organization, one company, one person that's going to own that digital twin. So I think the avatar is kind of an interesting concept of kind of separating the ownership of that portion of the digital twin that you care about. So, the example I was just having this conversation yesterday, where when you're doing, your early designs and you're doing simulation, you might have multiple different simulations that are just validating a design. But when you're passing this downstream, they might not need to know all of the simulation tests that you've done. So that simulation is still part of the digital twin. But that owner that gets the data, the final result, still wants a simulation of what was the final result for their digital twin. So what happens to this other data? Is it still not part of the digital twin? So that's the whole idea. There's not one digital twin that one person, one company will own. And even in a lot of cases, that digital twin will be spread out across multiple organizations as well. This is the whole idea that the data platform of platforms being on different companies. So it's a very difficult question. And it really, it's hard to answer in the case that and it depends on what you define as digital twin too. So, so that was my 2 cents.
Yeah, we had a question from Jorge, and it reminded me of something you said, Ronald, about the idea of the human aspect of the shipyard and processes. And so Jorge asked, with all this integration, do you lose the human-centric approach to shipbuilding? Does it become all automated? So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't believe I don't believe we will see that anytime soon. Obviously, there's a lot of fabrication and robotization taking place where work that is hard to have executed by people because they need to crawl into spaces and all that can be mitigated. There are also some local initiatives, some shipyards that are revising their, let's say, engineering handbook in order to prevent these, let's say, engineer for production or design for production. So I believe that if you combine these traits together, do a smart engineering, think about how you will build it, actually, that a lot of these topics can be automated to a higher extent, but then still we need people to ultimately build the ships. And I've seen pictures from slideshows from people who had a different opinion, but they don't work in shipbuilding anymore. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'd like to add something if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
When we put smart ship in production at Shipbuilding Atlantic, I had a small chat with the CEO, and I was half joking and telling him, now people don't need to talk to each other as much because they have access to everything on the tablet and web browser and so on. And he was very, very fast to correct me and say, no. They will talk to each other just as much, maybe even more, but they will talk better because they will know better. So he was very adamant in reminding me that the human component was a key component to their success, and that whatever tool they install, it's still going to be human-centric, and human element is very, very important. And that's, it's a key of their success. Yeah.
It's also, to add to your remark, it's also lazy thinking that the next way forward is to automate everything. If you take a look at just by walking around on the shop floor in the shipyard, and you are very serious about the level of maturity that you come across in terms of process maturity, then making steps explicit and organizing all that. If you really take that serious, then you will probably find that the 4 or 5 new steps that you can take to build your maturity do not have anything to do with that extensive level of automation. So, how do they call that in Lean? Is doing the Gemba or something to that extent? Walking around and taking a look at it's very useful.
We have a question here from Paul, and he says, accepting that a single one system to rule them all is not feasible, what is the backbone you'd all suggest to link all these systems together? Matthias, maybe I'll pass that one off to you since PROSTEP, that's what PROSTEP does. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, it depends on what you really understand, how you define the term backbone. But there are in my opinion, there are two possible valid definitions of backbone. If you would take backbone as the place where you do consistently store information about something, then the backbone there would be not just one backbone, but the backbone would basically maybe change over time, and also being something like a distributed system, again, system of system or platform of platform, depending on the different nature of the information, which is, if you want to have, or if you are talking about product development information, you might have a PDM system, which is the backbone for all this product development information, or you want to call it system of record or single source of truth, as long as development is going on. And then once development is completed, you can basically put this in an archive, but take a copy and take it further to the next backbone system, which would basically take care for the information about this product, like ship, along or throughout its life cycle or its operational life cycle, right? And in parallel, you might have another backbone, which is reflecting your resource situation in the company who is building or making this ship. And there you have machinery, you have labor, you have materials that you are buying and then putting together to make the ship at the end. And that's another type of backbone, which is distinct from the development information. And you have that system as well. So that's basically, if it comes to persistently storing information, in my opinion, there's not one backbone, but it's changing over time, and it's different depending on the type of information you are talking about. Another type of definition about backbone is, and I think Denis mentioned it in the beginning in his statements, is digital thread. So more and more people or more and more companies are looking into traceability and into being able to follow up what has happened and what has been changed and created based on what, and being able to certify or prove at the end that certain things have been taken into consideration and so on and so on. And then you are talking about another type of backbone, which is the interconnectivity of all the information that somehow played a role along the life cycle of a product, from its very beginning, from its ideation at the beginning, product development, product realization, operation, maintenance, and so on. And then you have another concept of backbone, which is a level that goes across all those different persistent storage backbone systems. And this is more in my understanding, in my envisioning, this is more a lightweight type of layer across all those different persistent storage systems. And it's more using linkage instead of data or information federation. So data is not redundantly moved into this digital thread type of layer or backbone, but it's basically referenced from there, and it still remains and stays in the persistency storage layer or system, but you have an overall interconnected thread of information that is that's developing further and further as time goes by, and as the product's life cycle is going on and is progressing. This is the type of backbone I would, from today's perspective, that I would think is playing a more and more important role in companies, for products, for people in companies using products, for companies making products. That will be a concept that we will see will be implemented more and more in the future, and will play a much growing role over time. So that's basically these two type of answers that I can give.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our hour here. I'll just end off with maybe one or two more questions. Virgil here asked, this might be a good one for Denis. What's the SSI path forward with these specific partners? What are the kind of goals and objectives?
Yeah, I think the goals that we have with these partners is the continuation of our partnership, of our connection. So as from the get-go of the philosophy of SSI, we've always had a strong relationship with many of our partners, that we've always felt that, again, we're a piece of a bigger puzzle. So we need to be able to work with our partners to consume and distribute information easier and better. So the continuation with these partners, as well as others, is to improve the flow of information. We've done a lot of work. I think the software industry has done a lot of work where we really try to make it a lot easier on connecting our systems and our applications. It's never done. There's always more to do, more data, more information to be connected. And in essence, the way that I look, if I look from our ultimate vision, I think maybe even the collection of all of us, is that we really want the connections to be something that the users don't, or our clients don't have to worry about. When you're connecting these two systems, information will flow, workflows will flow across without just, almost, if you will, just plug and play. So it's very transparent. So, there's obviously a lot of work that has to be done. There's a lot of complexities, which I think forget who was mentioning, I think it was actually Runar, you were kind of mentioning, where, we have all different applications and platforms that have different processes and data structures and workflows. So it's not as easy as just connecting, data to data. It's not a mapping exercise. There's a little bit more to it. So there's always a little bit more effort and workflow for it. So again, the continuation is really just improving our connection to more seamlessly connect information and support more workflows.
Can I make a small addition to that? Because what's also very positive about these connections is that new capabilities emerge from the connection, right? So we've seen that for instance, making a predictable planning is our focus point. Doing that with your data and having that data is your focus point. But doing that together, we now can make a prediction using AI within the planning, for instance. And that's a capability that we could not do without each other, let's say.
Yeah, very, very good point. Yeah. The sum is greater than the parts. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say that the sum of this panel presentation was much greater than the parts, but you guys are all great individually as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time here for any more questions. We had a lot of them, and unfortunately, we still have a lot left unanswered. Maybe that's a great idea, a great reason to have another one down the road. But thanks again, and thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day, vacation, evening, whatever's coming up next for you.